Hello everyone, welcome to episode 2 of the screencast. In this episode we are going to start deploying our application to Google Cloud. So the first thing we're going to want to do is sign up for a Google Cloud account. And you just click on that try button and it's going to ask you to sign in. If you have a Google account or a Gmail account, I think you can just sign in here. Otherwise you'll have to create a Google account. So if you don't have a Google account, go ahead and create an account here. Otherwise, I have my domain is a Google account, so I'm just going to sign in with that. The next screen here is just going to ask you to agree to the terms of service, and it's going to tell you about a credit they got going on right now. I'm not sure by the time you see this if the credit will still be going on, but that's there for now. So on the next screen here, it's going to ask for some more information. It's going to ask for account type. We can choose individual for that. It's going to also ask for some personal information like your address and your name. And it's also going to collect a credit card number, which on this screen is just used for validation. It's not going to be charging us right away. We are going to be switching technically to a paid account later on in the screencast series because we need some features enabled that you can only get when you enable a paid account. But with the credit running, we really shouldn't be charged anything because the $300 credit goes quite a long ways. So you shouldn't really get charged anything for working through the screencast. That said, you should keep an eye on the billing going forward. So once sign-up's complete, you should land here on this Getting Started page, which kind of is just like the landing page for Google Cloud. If you've used Amazon Web Services, you've probably seen their similar functionality here. There's a navigation bar here on the side, which kind of gives you quick access to popular resources you can add. You can pin things so they'll stay up on top here. So say we can pin billing, and then I'll all be up above here, above whatever Google thinks is important. So I'll just pin Kubernetes Engine. We're going to need that. Cloud SQL, we'll pin that one. Anyway, so there's that. There's a tour here. Maybe you want to take that if you're new to things. There's a search function here. So if we wanted to search for Cloud SQL, that's right here. This is also bringing up some APIs. We'll get into that a bit later, but Google Cloud by default has a lot of APIs disabled. Partly, I think, as a security precaution, partly probably as like a billing thing, so that you can't accidentally turn things on and start getting billed for stuff. So for certain resources, we need to explicitly enable APIs before we create things. So we'll have to do that for some of the resources we create. Let's see here. There's a Cloud Shell, which is kind of a nifty way to do CLI commands without having to install a bunch of stuff on our computers locally. There's a way to send feedback directly from here, which is kind of nice because you don't have to fire up your desktop screenshot software and then try to figure out where to send stuff. It has it nicely included here, so you can just mock up like what you see right on your screen here. It's highlighted stuff. I can type up a description and I could send that to them directly, which I've had to do stuff like that before, and it's pretty handy just to have this right here. I guess there's help here you can search through. Notifications, we're going to be seeing this become active in a little bit. Once you start spinning up resources, it'll give you little notifications up here of what's going on. If you have more than one Google account that Chrome recognizes or Google recognizes, this lets you switch between them. So if you have like a personal account and say your work uses Google stuff, you might have to be switching between them. So that's it for a quick intro. Maybe take the tour if you're interested in things at a deeper level. This project switcher up here basically shows you the different projects you can switch between. Google created a default project for us called My First Project. Notice this display name here is separate from this ID over here, and notice that this auto-generated ID, this has to be globally unique across Google Cloud. So we'll probably run into this later, but we have to make sure that IDs we're generating for certain resources are globally unique. And projects are basically the main way to organize resources in Google Cloud. Google has a nice document here kind of explaining things, but the gist of it is that all resources have to go into a project. So resources are like compute engine instances, they have app engine services here, cloud storage buckets, those are all resources. And you can separate them like they have in their example here, like sort of different development environments. Say they have like dev, test, you could have staging, QA, production. So it's kind of a nice way to organize things, security wise, billing wise. That way you don't have your QA environment go crazy and start creating a bunch of stuff. Say there's like a bug or something that starts firing up a bunch of stuff, or somehow goes crazy and basically you start hitting resource limits, you start getting things throttled. You really don't want that affecting your production environment. So it can be a nice way to separate things out. And if your organization ever gets large or something, they have these folders, which is just a way of kind of grouping projects together. So if you have different teams, they can keep things nicely organized. And then the organization is like the root level. So if you had a G Suite account, your organization would be here at the root. It would say, foobar.com or whatever. So we'll be using this for our first project. Okay guys, so the next step is going to be installing the Cloud SDK locally. That's going to install the gcloud, gsutil, and BQ command line tools. gcloud is going to be used for basically creating different Google Cloud resources. gsutil is basically used for cloud storage stuff uniquely. For some reason, that's broken off into its own tool. So I'm going to follow these Linux instructions because I'm running Ubuntu. I'm not going to follow the Ubuntu specific instructions because if I remember right, these packages don't include the completions for like ZSH or for Bash or for your shell. So I'm going to follow these instructions right now. If you're using Mac, obviously follow the Mac instructions. And as you can see here, it's saying it's going to update our path and it's going to enable shell completion, which is what we want. I actually want to update ZSH-RC instead of Bash. Okay, it's going to say start a new shell for the changes to take effect, so we have to start a new login shell, so I'm going to do that. And now, if I type in a gcloud command, and if I hit tab, see it shows completions here, so the different gcloud resources, compute, config, so we can just kind of use tab to navigate through stuff here, whatever we want to do. So if we were to run that command right now, what we'd get is that it doesn't know who we are. So in order to do that, we need to run gcloud auth login. And that's going to go ahead and open a browser window. That's going to prompt us to log into our Google account. And it's going to say we're now authenticated. So now if we go back here, it's going to say we're now logged in. Our current project is none. It's going to say we can set that. So if we did that, we can do gcloud config set project. And if we go back to our other window over here, we can grab our ID. And that basically sets a config value for us. And we can list config values if we do config list, I believe. So that's going to show us the current settings, our account. We did not disable usage reporting in the project. So basically every time you type in a gcloud command, it's going to be in the context of whatever the current project is set to. So you basically want to update that if you're switching around between projects. And if we use our tab completion to kind of explore the API of this command line thing, we can see there is get value, which will show the current value of a config option. List we already did. Set, if we want to set a config value. Unset just unsets it or deletes it. And then configurations is kind of confusingly named, but that's sort of a way to store a group of config options. So say if I was switching from a personal project like what we're working on now to like a work project, you can store whole groups of configuration settings under these configurations. So this one that we have right now is default. We could maybe create a new one if we wanted to create, whoops, I didn't pass in enough stuff. It does say here at the end you can do -- help. You can do that with pretty much any command. You just tack on -- help, and it gives you nice options for kind of learning about stuff. So between that and like tab completion, you can kind of discover a lot of the CLI commands you can do, which is pretty handy. So it's telling me I need to provide a configuration name here. So if I created one called foo, and then I did gcloud config configurations list, it's going to list foo, which is the new one I just created. It is active. The default one that we were on is now not active. And it looks like I don't really have anything set right now. So if I did gcloud config list, you can see really the only setting is this default usage reporting is set to false. So yeah, so we can switch back to our default configuration. We'll activate default. Okay. So the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to start actually creating resources to run our app. So the first thing we probably want to do is go into Kubernetes Engine, and you're going to see this getting ready thing, and you're going to see the little spinner there. You're going to see the notifications pop up, and what this is doing is it's starting to enable these APIs that we need to be enabled in order to run stuff. If you're doing things from the web console, this stuff is just going to kind of happen automatically. But if you're doing stuff from the command line interface, you might see errors telling you that you need to enable something, and it may or may not prompt you saying that, like asking you if you want to enable it, and it'll do it for you. But that's something to be aware of. So we're going to want to create our first cluster as soon as it's done here. Actually, while that's getting ready, we can actually start thinking about another thing we have to enable, which is how are we going to get our code running on Kubernetes Engine? Well, we're going to have to use Google's container registry, which is their managed Docker registry for storing Docker images on. So we can go ahead and look that up. Oops, container registry. So if you log into there, I guess nothing needs to be enabled for that. We'll also be using their cloud builder, cloud build. We can click into there. We're going to want to enable that API. So that's going to take a little bit. And while that's being enabled, we're also going to need Cloud SQL. So why don't we go ahead and browse into there. So it looks like Cloud SQL is actually ready to go. So let's go ahead and create our first instance here. And we're going to choose Postgres because that's better than MySQL. And for the instance ID, this doesn't have to be globally unique, unlike our project name. So I'm just going to use caption image DB. You can use the same. For password, I'm just going to choose password. This doesn't have to be secure, so that'll be easy to remember. Under configuration options, we're going to want to change this. We're going to want to enable private IP, and that's going to prompt you to enable this API. Go ahead and do that. Might take a few seconds to do that. That's all fine. Allocate and connect. So this allocate and connect is going to take a few minutes to complete while Google spins up some networking stuff for us in the background. So while that's going on, I thought I would just mention that this private IP option is a fairly new option. I think it just came out a few months ago. This was recorded in December 2018. I think it came out in September. So It's a pretty nice option. It used to be that if you wanted a secure connection from your container to your Cloud SQL database, you'd have to run this thing called the Cloud SQL proxy, and you would typically have to run it as like a sidecar container in your Kubernetes pods. So it would be running right alongside the container that needs the SQL connection, and it would kind of create the secure tunnel. And then through the container interlinking of a Kubernetes pod, it would kind of expose a regular port that most applications use to connect to a SQL database, a regular port that you can connect to just like a regular SQL connection string. Long story short, though, the Cloud SQL proxy was kind of a pain in the butt, so I'm glad that Google came out with this alternative option recently. So once that's done, you'll have this managed service connection filled in up here with our default network. So we're done there. We can scroll down and click create, which will create the instance. Okay, while that's going, let's jump back to Kubernetes Engine. Okay, it looks like Kubernetes Engine is ready for us, so we can go ahead and create a cluster now. And we can just leave the default name here. We can leave all these. I am going to use the latest version of Kubernetes that Google Cloud lets me use. And under node pools here, the number of nodes is basically just the number of VMs in the cluster. So this is going to be a 3 VM Kubernetes cluster. And we are going to want to click Advanced Edit here. And looks like Google Cloud already matched the node version to the cluster master version. They do have this auto scaling feature, which is kind of neat. Basically, if Kubernetes can't allocate a pod because there's not enough memory or CPU, it can scale up the size of the nodes in the cluster. So we could do like a minimum number of nodes 3, a maximum number of 5, and it would kind of dynamically scale up the cluster for that, but we can just leave that off. This is all fine. This auto upgrade is kind of a nice feature. It'll automatically upgrade Kubernetes to the latest versions for you. That's a nice feature. Auto repair, I think, just replaces unhealthy nodes. If they get unhealthy, it'll just spin it down, spin up a new node to replace it. And we can leave this default service account. Sometimes you want to create a specific IAM service account to run your nodes with, but I think for this project we're okay with the default. We are going to want to change this one though. We're going to want to change the API access. For the storage API, we are going to need full access, so we're going to change it to that. And I think that's good right there, so we can save that. And do not click create. Actually, we are going to need one other change. So we're going to do this cool little feature that Google Cloud has where it lets you look at the command line equivalent for all the options we just set. So the option that we are going to need to change is this no enable IP alias. We need to change that to get rid of the no. So it'll be -- enable IP alias. And the reason we need that option enabled is that's actually going to enable the private IP network, which is going to let us connect from our Kubernetes Engine instances to our Cloud SQL instance where we set up private IP networking. So it's kind of confusingly named, but that's the reason we need that. So we can go ahead and copy this, and we could paste it into our terminal because we have gcloud installed locally, but I thought this would be a nice chance to show off the Cloud Shell. So I'm going to fire that up, and since it's my first time running it, it's just going to do this little demo, but I'm going to click Start Cloud Shell, and hopefully in a second here it's going to open something up. Looks like there's kind of a UI bug here. I need to close that out, but it looks like it's starting something up here. Okay, so it looks like it pasted in the command that I had before, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to back up to the -- no enable IP alias option. You can hold down Alt and hit the left arrow if you don't know how to do that. That's the shortcut for that, to skip over words at a time. So if I take that out and hit enter, this should go ahead and provision my Kubernetes cluster. And this will take several minutes to complete, so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward the video to when that's done. And then once that's finally done, you can either X out up here to close this tab, or you can hit Control D, just like you're closing out of a regular terminal, and that'll close out of that. Okay guys, at this point we have our Cloud SQL instance running and we have our Kubernetes Engine cluster running. So the last thing we need to do in order to run our code on Kubernetes Engine is to build it as a Docker image and get that image somewhere where Kubernetes Engine can find it. So the easiest way to do that is to use Google's Container Registry, which is their private Docker image registry. So in order to do that, we are going to want to run this gcloud auth configure docker command, which is going to configure the Docker daemon on your system to save credentials to authenticate with Google's container registry. So we're going to go ahead and run that. And that's going to add a few registries here. We're going to be using gcr.io, which is kind of the general purpose one. I believe right now that's pointed at America. So if you're in Europe or elsewhere, it might be a little bit slow for you. You can also say us.gcr.io, and that is explicitly pointed at the USA. EU is obviously Europe, Asia is Asia. So you could use any of those registries as well. It's just going to change the physical storage location. So we'll continue with that, and then updated our Docker config. So then if we go back and continue reading the instructions here, it just tells us we can tag our image with the gcr.io registry and suffix with the project ID, and then our image name. So I'm gonna cd into the Git repo. I'm gonna build the image locally here. And this Docker build is gonna take a little bit of time, so I'm just gonna fast forward over the output here. Okay, so now the image is built. So now I'm going to tag it with the remote registry name, and I can't remember the exact project ID. So I'm going to just cheat here. Okay, and now I'm going to Docker push that. So at this point you can see in the upper right hand side there that the size of this Docker image is 473.5 megabytes, which is a bit of a problem for me because I have a cable internet connection and I can only push like 1 or 2 megabytes per second because my upload speed is pretty slow. If you have fiber or something like that, you're probably going to have better luck, but people like me, or even worse, like people in Australia who don't have very good internet, this solution isn't always the best to do a direct Docker push. So after this pushes, I'm going to show another solution. So I'm going to fast forward through this and we will look at another solution in a second. Okay, so Docker push is finally done, so our image should be available now in container registry. So if we pop back to the web console and we type in container registry here, we should see our image here. If we click into there, it's going to show our one image here with the tag of latest. There's a way here to copy the full image path if you want. You can edit tags. You can also delete images from here, from the web console. So yeah, this is ready now. If we wanted to use this in Kubernetes Engine, we could use it. But I'm going to show you one other way to build images by submitting remote builds to Cloud Build, it's called. So if we go back to the console here, and if we type in gcloud builds submit --config, and we use this cloudbuild.yaml, which I've already included in the Git repo for you. If we submit that, this is going to, basically you can see here uploading a tarball. It's going to tar up our local source code, and it's going to spin up a virtual machine in Google Cloud, and it's going to do a remote build in Google Cloud. And they use pretty beefy VMs for doing the build. So by doing that, by sourcing up by tarring up the source code and submitting that uses a lot less bandwidth than doing a full Docker build locally and having to push up several hundred megabytes. directly to the container registry stuff. So if you have limited bandwidth or something like that, this can be a pretty nice way to do things. So this is just streaming the output right now of the virtual machine that's doing the build remotely. So this is probably going to take a while to build, and I think you guys get the picture, so I'm not going to make you sit here and watch this whole build complete. So I actually think this is probably a pretty good place to stop. We have our resources running on Google Cloud. We have our Docker image built and ready to run. So in the next episode, we are going to go ahead and start running our stuff on Kubernetes Engine. So I will see you in the next episode.